and welcome to part 2 of my exploration of Shrewsbury Cemetery. So in this video I am carrying on telling the stories of some of the more interesting characters that you can find buried and remembered at Shrewsbury Cemetery. Also in this video towards the end I will tell the stories of some of the people that I couldn't find their graves no matter how hard I tried. As you'll see from the video previously in this one, the cemetery is vast, and whether their graves have just become damaged, have the writing is illegible, I just couldn't find them. But I really wanted to tell their stories as they are really interesting stories, so I will cover those at the end. So sit back and enjoy part 2 of my exploration of Shrewsbury Cemetery.
William James Clement was born in 1802 and died 29th of August 1870. Clement was an English surgeon and a Liberal Party politician who was active in local government and sat in the House of Commons from 1865 to 1870. Clement was the son of William Clement, who was a medical practitioner in Shrewsbury for over 60 years. He was educated at Shrewsbury School and at the University of Edinburgh. He was an honorary Fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons, a Fellow of the Society of Apothecaries, surgeon to the 1st Battalion of the Shropshire Rifle Volunteers, and in actual practice as a surgeon. He authored Observations in Surgery and Pathology, and in 1834 was awarded the Fothergillian Gold Medal of the Medical Society of London. In writing an account of 2 cases of intestinal obstruction in which the operation for the formation of an artificial anus was performed, one in the ascending, the other in the descending colon, he claimed to have been the first surgeon in Great Britain who successfully opened the ascending colon for intestinal obstruction. He was an alderman, mayor of Shrewsbury for 1861 to 62, a deputy lieutenant and justice of peace for Merionethshire, and a justice of peace for Shrewsbury Borough. At the 1865 general election, Clement was elected Member of Parliament for Shrewsbury. He held the seat until his death, aged 68, in 1870. He was known for his work amongst the poor of Shrewsbury living in slum areas and refused payment for treating them. On his death in 1870, a memorial obelisk with drinking fountain was erected in front of the railway station. When the forecourt was lowered, it was moved to the Dingle, but some years later it was moved again to St Julian Friars. Robert Bates Madison was born in Blaydon, County Durham on the 7th of July 1862. His family later moved to Sunderland, and it was there that the young Robert Madison learnt to sing and took part in amateur performances. In 1884 he joined the D'Oyly Carte Opera Company and toured with them. Whilst touring Europe in the operetta The Venetians, the First World War broke out, so he had to quickly return to England and decided to set up in business. He bought the County Theatre in Shoplatch and the George Hotel nearby, now demolished. He staged many fine operettas there and continued to sing on stage until he was 70. He was involved in local politics and was elected Mayor of Shrewsbury in 1924. In the same year, he was involved in an unsavoury incident at the theatre which led to a court appearance. 2 members of the audience were found to be sitting in the wrong seats, and when they refused to leave, a policeman was called. When they continued to hold their ground, Madison pulled one of them, Alfred Hawkins, out of his seat, taunting and berating him. As it turned out, the men's tickets had been stamped with the wrong details, and Hawkins received £25 from the mayor after suing him for slander. Madison was a keen motorist, and in March 1942 only narrowly escaped death when he accidentally drove his car into the overhang of a parked lorry in the town centre, smashing the car's windscreen and leaving him with severe facial injuries. He died on the 26th of April 1949, aged 86, and one of the bequests in his will was to the Actors and Music Hall Benevolent Fund. Hiram Howells was born in Oswestry in 1827, of relatively humble origins. He began his working life as a labourer, but in something of a rags-to-riches story, joined the police at the age of 28 and rose through the ranks to become superintendent by 1875. As his career developed and as he bettered himself accordingly, Hiram and his family moved from one part of the county to another. The 1881 census records 8 children as having been born variously at Wellington, Cleobury Mortimer, Market Drayton and Shrewsbury. He retired after nearly 30 years' service to policing in his native county and died in November 1888, aged 61. Perhaps the most colourful of all Shrewsbury's past mayors, John Frail was born in 1804 and came from humble beginnings. He left school at 13, barely literate. He was apprenticed to a local barber, but absconded and spent more than 2 years performing with an acting troupe in Lancashire and Cheshire. However, Mr. Nightingale, the barber, saw him perform and reclaimed him. Frail became a barber in his own right, but retired after a while to pursue his passion for horse racing. In 1843, he became clerk of the course for Shrewsbury Racecourse in Monkmoor and set about revitalising the business. Not content with local success, he went on to make his mark nationally in the racing world. His reputation even spread abroad, and in 1865 the French Emperor Napoleon III invited him to start the equivalent of the English Derby at Versailles, an offer that John Frail declined. Frail's energetic and abrasive approach to life led to the occasional dispute. On one occasion, he argued over the ownership of a racehorse with Dr. William Palmer. When Palmer threatened murder, Frail was forced to lock himself in his lodgings to forestall a possible attack. Later, he was a witness against Palmer at the celebrated Rugeley poisonings trial, which resulted in the doctor's execution by hanging. He branched out into politics, becoming agent at the general elections in Ludlow, and he was agent for Benjamin Disraeli in Shrewsbury. In 1837, he was kidnapped by opponent thugs who intended to throw him into the River Severn, but was rescued by an elderly lady who raised the alarm. Frail was elected to the town council in 1855, and in 1859 was accused of corruption for bribing electors, and in 1860 was sued by Thomas Southam for assault. He was re-elected in 1865, becoming mayor in 1878, but died whilst in office. From humble beginnings, Frail's life was certainly not dull, and he achieved much. Mrs. Marion Wallace Koch was born in 1883 in Valparaiso, Chile, the daughter of William Scott, who was an import and export business. Her mother, Emma Holmyard, was a descendant of one of the Pilgrim Fathers who settled in America in 1620. In 1904, Marion married James Koch, a member of the Shrewsbury Tannery family in Barker Street. She developed an interest in politics and public life, and in 1910 became Shropshire's first county commissioner for Girl Guides. During World War I, she worked as a nurse at the military hospital at Oakley Grange. Her husband died in 1920, leaving her with 6 children. She took over the family business, and it is said was the only woman in such a position. She continued with her political activities, and in 1934 was the first female mayor and the last one to have to meet her own expenses, and it was largely due to her efforts that future mayors received an allowance from the council. She became the first female recipient of the Freedom of Shrewsbury. She died in 1958, but not before she saw her daughter Eleanor become Shrewsbury's second female mayor in 1956. Trumpet Major Thomas Monks was born at Lancaster in 1830 and enlisted in the Enniskillen Dragoons at the age of 13, serving as a trumpeter. In 1854 he went with his regiment to Crimea as part of General York Scarlett's Heavy Brigade. He was the general's trumpeter at the charge, staying alongside his leader and coming out without a wound. Monks was awarded the French Military Medal for his service in the Crimea, only one of 3 awarded to members of his regiment. Monks retired from regular service in 1872 with the Long Service and Good Conduct Medal and settled in Shrewsbury, where he joined the staff band of the Shropshire Militia. In 1875 he also joined the band of the Shropshire Yeomanry and was later appointed their trumpet major. In 1900 he offered to resign, but the regiment's colonel declined, and Monks was kept on as the colonel at the colonel's expense in recognition of his service. Trumpet Major Monks died of pneumonia on the 25th of May 1902, aged 72. His funeral cortege went from his home in Port Hill Road to the cemetery, being escorted by a detachment of the Shropshire Yeomanry led by Lord Berwick, the staff sergeants of the King's Shropshire Light Infantry, and a carriage load of local military and naval veterans. Flight Lieutenant Robert C. Jenkins met his death on the 8th of February 1922 at Farnborough Airfield in Hampshire in a flying accident. Aged 26, Jenkins was a flying instructor, described as a very excellent pilot who had done a great deal of instructional work. Piloting the plane in which Jenkins died was Observer Officer A. Hesketh. The two were in contact by telephone and the plane was fitted with dual controls. Hesketh survived the crash, though he suffered head injuries. Hesketh was making his second training flight of the day when Flight Lieutenant Jenkins met his death. They took off against the wind and cleared some small trees within the airfield perimeter, flew low over the A325 Farnborough Road, but crashed in the nearby Deep Cut Dairy when the wing caught a large tree, turning the plane completely over. It was smashed to splinters and Jenkins suffered a fractured skull. He never regained consciousness and died later the same day. His death brought to an end an outstanding career in both military and civil life. He served in France in early 1915, where he was badly wounded. He was mentioned in dispatches for gallant conduct and as a result received the Military Cross. He was awarded an MBE as well. His coffin was brought from Farnborough to Shrewsbury by train and was accompanied by men of the 4th Squadron in which he had served. Flight Lieutenant Jenkins came from a proud military family who lived at Cruckton Hall near Hanwood. His grandfather was Major General Charles Vanbrugh Jenkins, who died on the 10th of December. Charles was born at Roxter, Shropshire in March 1822. He was commissioned a cornet in the 1st Bengal Native Cavalry on the 27th of August 1839, serving during the 1842 Afghanistan campaign. During the advance on Kabul, he was presented at the forcing of the Khyber Pass on the 31st of March. Jenkins took part in the celebrated cavalry charge during this battle, in which then horsemen, though vastly outnumbered, inflicted heavy casualties on their counterparts and cleared the way to Kabul. As the troops weaved through the passes, they saw skeletons and unburied bodies. These were once proud soldiers of the 44th East Essex Regiment of Foot, which had been massacred at Gandamak on the 12th of January. Jenkins reached Kabul on the 15th of September, quickly negotiating the release of 130 British hostages, including 22 children. Jenkins was promoted to lieutenant on the 1st of January 1844, and he served during the 1845-46 Sutlej campaign against the invading Sikh Khazar army, which posed a severe threat to company rule in India. He was present at the Battle of Aliwal on the 28th of January 1846, when Sir Harry Smith's division attacked a force of 20,000 Sikhs and 70 guns under Ranjun Singh. The Indian Native Cavalry, led by the 16th Lancers, dispersed the Sikh cavalry and prevented them from turning Smith's vulnerable left flank. During the pursuit across the Sutlej, 67 guns were captured. During the 1848-49 Punjab campaign, Jenkins fought at both Chillenwala and Gujarat. After the Battle of Gujarat had been won, the cavalry pursued the Sikhs for over 12 miles, forcing their surrender at Rawalpindi on the 8th of March 1849. Jenkins rose to the rank of captain on the 31st of January 1852. Transferring to the 1st Bengal European Cavalry, he advanced to major on the 1st of July 1857. He then joined the 19th Hussars, becoming lieutenant colonel on the 1st of January 1862 and colonel on the 1st of January 1867. He retired on the 11th of July 1877 as an honorary major general. Charles's son Edgar Francis Jenkins chose a career in law, ultimately rising to the very heights of his profession. During his lifetime he was no stranger to tragedy, and his first wife, Marianne Brooks, died the year after their marriage in 1884. He married again, however, in 1887 to Edith Turner, by whom he had a son and a daughter. Edgar himself was to die at the young age of 47 in January 1898. By then he'd made his home in London, though the family were living at Cruckton Hall, which they had inherited in 1879 from the Harris family. In 1875, Francis Harris, also Lord of Broseley Manor, died without issue, having made his cousin, Major General Charles Vanbrugh Jenkins, his heir. A memorial service was held for Edgar Jenkins at All Saints' Church in London. Edgar expressed the wish, however, to be buried back in Shropshire, and his body was brought by rail in a glass funeral car to be buried near to his numerous family members. Hilda Morrell is a well-known Shropshire name, but unfortunately she's probably better known for the way she died than the life she lived. She was born in 1906 and became a founder member of the Shropshire Conservation Trust, now the Shropshire Wildlife Trust, and was educated at Shrewsbury High School, followed by Newnham College, Cambridge, graduating with a Master's in English and French literature and modern and medieval languages. Her father and uncle ran a rose nursery in the Belvedere area of Shrewsbury, where she worked and developed her horticultural skills. Hilda became a leading authority on roses, particularly old and miniatures. The firm moved to new premises near Sutton Farm in 1961, but Hilda retired in 1970 and sold the nursery to Percy Thrower. In her later years, she became involved with the Council for the Protection of Rural England, and she became deeply interested in the campaign against nuclear power generation and challenged the government on many aspects. At the time of her death, she was working on a paper to present to the Sizewell inquiry and had been in close contact with CND, and suspicion was thrown on the manner of her death, with theories of security service links that were never proven. On the 21st of March 1984, Hilda was brutally assaulted in her own home on Sutton Road, driven in her own car to an isolated lane about 5 miles east of Shrewsbury, and left in a popular plantation on the far side of a ploughed field to die a lonely and agonising death from hypothermia. Police inquiries revealed that she had been out shopping in her car and then returned home to get changed before going out to lunch. The house had been systematically searched and money taken, and it seemed someone was already in the house or followed her in on her arrival. The intruder then drove the old lady to nearby Hormond Hill, dragged or carried her across an open field and left her to die after stabbing her several times. Her obituary in the Times concluded, "It is an almost intolerable irony that a life so dedicated to peaceful pursuits and to the pursuit of peace should have been terminated by an act of mindless violence." Hilda's ashes were scattered near a stone cairn at Main Gwynedd on the Shropshire-Wales border near Llanfillan. She is commemorated on her family grave. There have been many theories relating to the death of Hilda Murrell, but none could be proved, and gradually her story slipped out of the headlines and the public consciousness. In 2002, however, the police instituted a review of the 3,000 statements, 500 reports, 3,000 exhibits and 6,000 lines of inquiry associated with the case. This led to a breakthrough, and in June the following year, Andrew George from Shrewsbury was arrested and charged with the murder. He was convicted in May 2005, and he would have been 16 at the time of her death. He has always maintained his innocence, claiming he did commit burglary but never murdered Hilda Murrell. Even Hilda's nephew doubts his conviction of murder, so the mystery rumbles on. The ancestry of Thomas Pace has been traced back to Italian immigrants who lived in London around 1380. The family first came to Shropshire as farmers in the early 1600s. Thomas became the archetypical self-made man. He was born in 1856 at Brierley Hill, one of 8 children of a farm labourer who had just moved from Stockton near Bridgnorth in the hope of finding better work. Unfortunately, there were mining strikes, so they returned to Stockton, where Thomas began work on a farm at the age of 9, earning 2 shillings a week. He entered the building trade as a bricklayer's apprentice in Crewe and came to Shrewsbury in 1874, where he worked for Treasures, a local firm. He quickly rose to the position of foreman, and in 1888 left to set up his own business in Greenfield Street, later moving to Coton Hill before retiring in 1926. His firm built over 700 houses and was almost totally responsible for developing the Greenfields area, as well as much development in the Coleham and Kingsland areas. Pace was one of the first motorists in Shrewsbury and one of the first to own several cars at the same time. His driving career, however, ended in tragedy. After 30 years motoring, he was involved in a terrible accident in Barker Street in 1928. He was picking up his wife at the time in a new car, with which he wasn't very familiar. On restarting, without warning, he ran into a queue of people entering a bus, injuring several and killing a 51-year-old woman. As a result, he was fined £10 and banned from driving for 7 years. He did not live to see the end of his driving ban and died aged 78 in 1933. Frida Gosman, aged 31, and her friend Winifred Knowles, aged 25, are buried near each other in the older Catholic section of the cemetery. They both died in a major fire which started at the Paris Opéra Comique House on the 26th of May 1887. Opéra comique had developed in France as a light and pleasing antidote to standard opera, which audiences were beginning to find over-serious and boring. It included a spoken narrative involving jokes and opinions poking fun at the opera's main characters. There were 84 deaths in the disastrous fire, and they included a group of lady friends who were staying together in Paris. Amongst these were Winifred Knowles, who had been living on the continent for some time, but was a regular visitor to her family home in Shropshire. She was the daughter of Mr. Charles Knowles, a retired customs officer from Hadnall. Their friend Frieda Grossman was German. During the evening at the opera, they were caught in the huge fire which consumed much of the opera house. They desperately sought refuge in the refreshment room, but to no avail, and died from asphyxiation. Miss Knowles' watch stopped precisely at 6:05 a.m. Having received no response to a series of telegrams, their friend Mr. W. Summers travelled to Paris only to receive the terrible news of the death of his friends. Miss Knowles and Miss Gossman's coffins were brought by train to Shrewsbury via Gloucester. Following a short service in the Roman Catholic Cathedral and town walls, Miss Knowles was buried in the same grave as her mother, and Miss Gossman in a separate adjacent grave. The reason for Miss Gossman's body being brought to England remains something of a mystery. It seems likely that she had no close family to make funeral arrangements nearer to home. A further factor may have been French burial regulations, which could have resulted in her body being exhumed should regular payments not be kept up on her grave. John Hawley Edwards was born the 21st of March 1850 and was an English footballer who made one appearance for England in 1874 before going on to play for Wales in 1876. He was a member of the Wanderers team that won the 1876 FA Cup final. Edwards was born in Shrewsbury and educated at Shifnal Grammar School and was a qualified solicitor, being admitted in 1871. He played from 1873 to 1880 for Shropshire Wanderers, of which he was a founder and captain, when they reached the semi-final tie of the FA Cup in 1874 and were defeated by the Old Etonians. He was called into the England side as a late replacement for another Shrewsbury-born player, John Wiley. He made his solitary England appearance on 7th March 1874 against Scotland, playing as an inside forward. After a most competitive game, Scotland won 2-1, with Robert Kingsford scoring England's consolation goal. He was also a member of the Wanderers team, making his first appearance on the 4th of March 1874, scoring in a 4-0 victory over Westminster School. In 1876, he only made 2 appearances for Wanderers, both in the cup final when he played at centre forward against the Old Etonians. In the first match, played at Kennington Oval on the 11th of March 1876, Edwards scored the first goal, turning in a cross from Charles Wollaston. The Old Etonians equalised through Alexander Bonser, so the match went to a replay, which the Wanderers won 3-0, thus winning the trophy for the 3rd time in 5 years. Edwards had been instrumental in helping to establish the Welsh Football Association, serving as its first treasurer in 1876. A week after the FA Cup final replay, Edwards played for the Wales national team in their inaugural match, played at Hamilton Crescent, Partick, on the 25th of March 1876. The match ended in a 4-0 victory for the Scots. Edwards was one of 2 players to play at full international level for both England and Wales, the other being Robert Evans, who made 10 appearances for Wales and then played 4 times for England. He captained the Shrewsbury Town team, not the present Shrewsbury Town FC, who were formed in 1886, from 1876 to 1880, during which time they won both the Birmingham Senior Cup and Shropshire County Cup in the 1877-78 season, 2 years before he ceased to play after a series of knee injuries. Edwards was for a time also on the committee of the Birmingham and District Football Association and a founder of the County FA for Shropshire in 1877. Edwards was also a useful cricketer and played for Shropshire for several years and served the club as secretary, as well as for Warwickshire County, not first class, and Shrewsbury Cricket Club. He was later clerk to Shrewsbury Magistrates Court for 19 years until his death on the 14th of January 1893, while convalescing from a throat infection at Old Colwyn in Wales. He was aged just 42 years of age. There are a number of gravestones in the cemetery which commemorate and acknowledge the lives of men who served in the local constabulary. Samuel Farlow was a native of Shrewsbury, born in the final year of the 18th century. He He served in the borough police force for nearly 40 years, rising to the rank of superintendent in 1840 when he became chief officer of police. His responsibilities within the borough of Shrewsbury were many and varied. His gravestone is inscribed with a fulsome appreciation of his contribution. Here lies Sam Farlow, a name familiar and respected throughout this borough of the police force of which he was a member, as well as a faithful servant of the corporation for nearly 40 years. He was elected Mace Bearer in 1825 and held that office until the incoming of the new corporation in 1835. He was again appointed Superintendent of Police, Marshal and Crier of the Court to the corporation in 1839, holding these offices until his death on the 7th of April 1857, aged 58 years. A few of his fellow townsmen, including the mayors under whom he served, have caused his stone to be placed over his remains to record his long service in this borough. John Henry Morris died on the 12th of November 1893, aged 23, through an accident in a football match. John Morris, known as Jack, was a labourer in a brickyard and lived with his sister in Canal Buildings, New Park Road in Castle Fields, and was Shrewsbury Town's left back. On the 11th of November, Shrewsbury were playing Madeley Town in the first round of the Wednesbury Charity Cup when Morris sustained his fatal injury. Madeley were losing 4-0 when their outside left, William Evans, collided with Jack and he went down. Herbert Evers asked Jack if he was okay and only got a groan in response. He was carried to the changing room and then taken to the Salop Royal Infirmary. There was some confusion as to what happened at the infirmary, but whatever the reason, Morris didn't want to stay. Allegedly, as he groaned in pain, he was told, "Don't be a baby," and it was implied that if he returned to the infirmary, he would not be treated. He was taken, limping badly, to the Unicorn Hotel and given a drop of brandy. There he repeated an accusation that his injuries had been caused deliberately. Later, when the pain persisted, he saw a doctor and returned to the infirmary with a note saying he should be admitted. Staff there debated whether to operate or not, but ultimately decided against it, preferring to arrange a further consultation the following day to see if the symptoms had become more urgent. A hemorrhage to the abdomen was diagnosed, but it was believed to have stopped bleeding. The possibility of a rupture was also raised, but no specific symptoms could be found. Jack died of internal bleeding the following day. At the inquest, the coroner went to great pains to exonerate the infirmary and its doctors from any blame whatsoever. Morris was treated most kindly there, he said, and could not be treated better anywhere. Ultimately and inevitably, the jury returned a verdict of accidental death. On the day of his funeral, a large crowd gathered to pay their respects to Jack, a promising player who had turned out for Shropshire against Wolverhampton Wanderers at St George's only a few days before his death. As his coffin was conveyed from his home in Castle Fields to the cemetery, the streets were lined with spectators. The whole of the funeral expenses were met by the president of the Shrewsbury Town Club, Mr. H.D. Green. Leonard Denham Bradley, Stephen Crabtree Hodgson and Henry Morris. On the 15th of October 1907, just after 2 a.m, a train derailed at speed just out Shrewsbury Station, referred to in the Chronicle newspaper as one of the most terrible accidents of modern times. Having jumped to junction at speed, it was flung onto its side, the coaches piled up on the engine, tearing up rails for 140 yards. An eyewitness report stated, "Dreadful sights were seen on every hand. Here a dreadful mutilated body was revealed. There sufferers were discovered hopelessly involved in the wreckage and imploring to be released. One by one the bodies were removed, and ere long the parcels office on the island platform was converted into a gruesome and blood-stained mortuary. 18 lives were lost, 11 passengers, the driver, the fireman, 2 guards and 3 post office sorters, and 33 others were listed as injured. A public appeal fund was opened, also a post office national appeal. Stephen Hodgson left a wife and 7 children, including a daughter born on the day he was buried. A Board of Trade inquiry took place with many theories, but the full truth of what happened has never been resolved. Sadly, I couldn't find any of the 3 graves. A huge thank you to Stan Sedman for sharing his cemetery tour notes with me. And also I got some of the information from this book here about Shrewsbury Cemetery. The rest I found on the internet. Again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Remember, stay safe everyone.